Does government want to kill the legal profession? Well, certainly a new piece of legislation which is proposed makes it look like that. Des Williams is the chairman of Werksmans, one of the biggest law firms in South Africa. Give me a sense, Des, as to where we are with what they're calling the legal practice bill.
Yes, the legal practice bill has reached quite an advanced stage, and the indication from government now is that it should be implemented, enacted before the elections next year. The major feature of this bill is an attempt to have regulation for a unified profession, both the advocates and the attorneys.
Is that a bad thing? We've got bank regulation, we regulate everything else in South Africa. Why not regulate lawyers?
Well, we mustn't forget that attorneys certainly are regulated already. There is an Attorneys Act. Attorneys are interacting with clients, with members of the public. We have things like trust accounts. Those have to be dealt with and regulated properly. I think where the major issue arises here is with advocates who see this as a huge threat to the independence of the profession. And my view is that it is in fact as much of a threat to attorneys as it is to advocates.
But aren't advocates in other parts of the world, the UK for example, has got quite a strict regulatory regime, and QCs fall under that regulatory regime, don't they?
There is similar legislation in the UK, but I think that the major difference in South Africa is our history and our background and our huge concern about political interference and a very high level of suspicion. There's a huge suspicion about the agenda and what the real motives are behind this proposed legislation.
What do you suspect are the motives? I mean, one can speculate, but that is why there is that mistrust in the first place.
Well, the suspicion is that government would want to have a far higher level of control of the profession, and I think the sort of suspicion that one has and that is fueled is when we see what happens with, for example, judicial appointments on the Judicial Services Committee. We see attempts to promote transformation in the profession. I think obviously we need to have transformation in the profession. There does have to be, but the view in the profession is that the profession is perfectly able to do that itself.
Isn't this a case of a profession looking after its own vested interests, and government, quite rightly, because it represents the people of South Africa, wanting to ensure that the profession transforms at a more proactive rate rather than at its own steady and comfortable old school tie rate?
No, I don't think so. I think that the concern is well founded, because what will happen if there is a level of interference, particularly with advocates, that flows through to the type of judges who are appointed. Judges generally in South Africa are appointed from the ranks of advocates, although not exclusively so, but most of them come from the ranks of advocates. And if we start seeing a higher level of control, government control of that profession, it is inevitably going to affect the bench as well.
Does the legal practice bill undermine the sanctity of South Africa's entire legal system?
I believe that it does. It is important for the judiciary, obviously, to be totally independent. Related to that is the independence of the rest of the profession. And if we are going to see increasing attempts to control the profession at every level, attorneys, advocates, and through to the judiciary, that certainly does undermine the independence of the profession as a whole and the independence of the judiciary.
I've seen a commentary on this, and I think it's attributed to yourself, describing the legal practice bill as an absurdity.
Yes, I'm not sure that it's attributed to me, but I would certainly agree with that. It is an absurdity. It is full of all sorts of anomalies and just things that are completely unworkable. For example, in the latest revision of the bill, there are provisions relating to the way that the assets and the business of the various law societies would be transferred to the central body, and how that would be done, and a provision that disputes relating to all of that would then be referred to arbitration. But what that completely overlooks is that one cannot have an arbitration without an arbitration agreement. Parties have to agree to arbitrate. This Act provides for arbitration in terms of the Arbitration Act, but that's nonsense. It can't be.
And who would the arbitrator be? surely somebody from the legal profession, because if you're arbitrating a legal issue, it would be somebody from the legal profession. There's a vested interest there. Does it serve any purpose whatsoever?
Yes, I can imagine that would be fairly controversial when it comes to appointing an arbitrator.
When you look at it and you describe this as an absurdity, isn't the absurdity the point? So much legislation that we see being drawn up at the moment goes to absurdity, with then pull back to a point of mutual agreement, and government has got a stronger hold over the sector it wishes to regulate. Isn't this inevitable, that you're going to see some form of regulation?
It is inevitable that we will see some form of regulation, and what we must bear in mind is that this bill provides a conceptual framework. What is contemplated is that there would have to still be a great deal of negotiation and discussion and fleshing out of the bones in this bill before we end up with something truly workable. The detail isn't there.
One would think that if there was a profession best suited to be able to mould legislation to its own needs, it would be the legal profession, wouldn't it?
You would think so, and the legal profession as a whole has put forward a number of very positive, workable suggestions.
Are you being ignored?
Yes. The profession is being ignored. Well, not totally. I think some of the comments that have been made over recent years have been taken into account. There has been an attempt to accommodate them. But the major underlying fundamental point, the threat to independence, is not being dealt with. And we are still facing a situation where there will be government control of this new unified body.
The legal practice bill, massively controversial. Des Williams, Chairman of Werksmans, thanks very much.